Welcome back to another episode of Divorce to Altitude. I am Ryan Calamea. This week, we're going to be talking about AI, and there has been talk about an AI revolution, and we're going to talk about how AI is going to impact divorces. And we're joined by a former guest, Rafe Palmer from STG Divorce Law in Chicago. Rafe, how's it going?
Great. Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, welcome back. We'll talk about when people hear you talk about AI, I think they'll realize why we're having you come back on. Previously, we had talked about your book, but AI, it's like Terminator. We've been hearing about AI, and there have been movies like The Terminator about AI, but it feels it's happening right now. And so, can you, for listeners that may not know what Chat GPT or what AI is, can you give our listeners maybe like a baseline understanding of what's happening right now as we're recording it and how it's impacting the every industry, at least when we're recording this in 2023?
Sure, Ryan. A couple big things have happened recently, and research in artificial intelligence and the recent manifestations of that, which people will say are technically not artificial intelligence, but they really look like it to the average person. They're large language models like ChatGPT and image models such as DALL-E, DALL-E. Both projects of OpenAI, started famously by Elon Musk. Now it's a private company. Microsoft recently spent a whole huge sum of money to purchase an interest in OpenAI and then acquired access to ChatGPT to incorporate into Bing. So the short story is some brilliant engineers have figured out how to digest a large volume of data. So in the case of ChatGPT, to take a huge pool of text information. So imagine a vast sea of books, web pages, tremendous amount of text information, and digest it into a computer model, and then basically teach the model how to think in plain English by referencing all of that text information. So if you imagine it, all that information stuffed into a mix master and chopped up into pieces, with a model then looking at that in a way that we might think is almost intelligent. And then when you ask it questions in English, it can respond in a way that seems intelligent and in plain English, actually very good English responses. This stuff has been researched now for years, and everyday people are now seeing the fruits of that research, and they're using ChatGPT and other similar tools to do things nobody really thought possible before with these artificial intelligence models. And similarly, DALL-E is an image model that allows you to create a painting in the style of the Impressionists, or a line art drawing or charcoal of any image you can think of. And the artificial intelligence engine in that case, the model has essentially digested a tremendous amount of artwork, and then it's been, if you will, taught rules about it so that it understands what Impressionism is, it understands what a charcoal is, and can then render images based on human English language prompts. It's pretty incredible when you play with these things to see what they can do. And I've been fascinated by technology ever since I was a kid and follow this stuff all the time, both my personal interest and for the business. So it's been a special interest of mine.
Likewise, I think listeners to Divorce at Altitude know that I like to geek out on the tech stuff. I am certainly, admittedly, a victim of the shiny object syndrome. I think, Rafe, you are too. Okay, we can talk about AI and how cool it is. And for listeners, if you have tried it out, ChatGPT or any sort of version of AI, and I would submit that anyone listening to this has experienced AI in some capacity. But
Sure.
how, just as an example, Rafe, we came up with the outline and the title to this podcast episode with AI. It spit out, we put in AI and divorce, and it spit out the title that people have clicked on, presumably, if they're listening to this. It was intriguing and it knew that this is a sexy or an interesting title. And then it came out with an outline, which listeners can't hear. But what are the examples? You're in Chicago, you run a family law firm, STG Divorce Law. How are you really using it right now? And then we'll talk about where we see things going, and maybe listeners will have their eyes open to where at least this could be going when it comes to law, lawyering, and specifically with divorce.
Sure. And we'll get to why these models aren't quite ready for full throttle application in the legal field. But there's a lot of usefulness right now with a law practice, really any business. And so right now I'm using ChatGPT and Jasper.ai, which is it's a version of ChatGPT that's tuned for writing, really for writing things like marketing pieces. And I've written an extensive blog post about parenting using a large language model using Jasper and ChatGPT. That article might have taken me 3 hours in the past, and it took about 20 minutes. The reasoning is it came up with a very good outline that I edited for the article, similar to the way that we generated an outline for this show. And then I fleshed it out, made some changes, rearranged it the way I liked. And then I asked it to flesh out those outline items, and it gave me nice bullet points underneath those. And I added some more of my own, and then used that and asked it to elaborate on the outline, which it did, and created basically each paragraph of the blog post with a pretty good introduction and ending paragraph, conclusion paragraph. And I did some editing, which the editing took most of the time. And then I had a nice, like 800 word blog post that I then published on our firm website. And it's valuable content for our readers to know about things to look out for with parenting with children. And it was a tremendous asset for me to speed up the process. And so that's an example. Another example is writing a description for hiring a paralegal. So we wanted to post a job post for a paralegal and for an associate attorney. And ChatGPT came up with a very good post that needed some editing for customizing it for our purposes, but the baseline material was all there. And that's some of the power that you can unleash with these tools right now, because the tools have digested so much information, probably from articles and business books and blog posts, that you've got access to tremendous power under the hood in these tools.
Yeah, a couple things that come to mind for me, Rafe. First of all, we're using it in a similar capacity where we send out to various clients emails explaining the divorce process, and those emails they've been optimized, so they've been streamlined. There's a feature within the program that we use where it summarizes something into 5 bullet points, and so it makes things a little bit clearer. But similar to you, we're using it within blog posts and other marketing, but I don't think we are that far away from, and you hear these stories, for example, about ChatGPT passing the bar exam.
Right.
And if you think about it, there are so many different applications. And I was recently solicited by a vendor who has a program where they put in bank information, and then the program looks for unusual spending. In essence, does a forensic accounting, and it's specifically for financial fraud, or hey, divorce lawyers, we deal with that. And you go through that, whereas you file a motion to modify parenting or some other motion. I think we are going to be very quickly talking about the AI bot or the AI program drafting that motion, pulling the law, and then analyzing who the judge is and knowing that judge's preferences in terms of, do they like the petitioner versus respondent as a referral to the partners or parties versus husband and wife, mother and father? There's going to be data. There's so much data out there. And I think those are just a couple examples of how AI is going to change the landscape when it comes to divorce and how it's being done.
Yeah, one of the early entries in the field is called Spellbook, and I did a demo recently for a week. Spellbook runs alongside in Word as a plugin, and it uses AI. I think they're using the GPT or the OpenAI uh, API, so they're accessing OpenAI's model, and they've added a huge database of contracts known as Edgar, which for computer people I've described as GitHub for contracts. The government requires certain contracts are posted and are public. It's a big repository of contracts written by some large law firms. They incorporated those contracts into a private instance or a walled garden, a large language model. So it's digested those contracts and it can intelligently look at contract language and suggest missing terms, show you where there are inconsistencies in the contract, show you things that you should be concerned about if you're looking at it from one party's standpoint versus another. And you can even use it to draft language. Because of that power of that language model, as long as you feed it the right data, it theoretically can then use that data in a way that we think is intelligent to look for flaws and also suggest fresh content. The power of that is you're right, is already here for people doing commercial contracts. And the company was talking to me about creating an instance for our firm where we would have it digest marital settlement agreements, parenting agreements, so we could intelligently look at a document sent by another attorney to show us things that are missing, suggest definitions of terms that aren't defined, and help us draft language. You're absolutely right. I think it's a lot closer than most lawyers think, certainly, and most lawyers are comfortable with, for sure. So it's important that we stay ahead of these tools. And that's why you and I know not only do we geek out, but we think it's good for our clients and for our business to be aware of this stuff.
Yeah, my firm, we use Text Expander, which is an expansion. We'll put in various codes. And the way that we have it is a parenting plan, for example. We have different language, for example, when alcohol is involved in parenting. And there's different testing protocols, and it depends on the severity of the problem. So if it's like, you shouldn't drink with the kids. That's one thing. Is it should you prohibit both parties from being drunk with the kids? What if you get into monitoring? So we have all these different options in our system, and I'm sure you do too, Rafe. Where you're selling the house, it depends on, is your client keeping the house while it's being listed, and that might be a little bit more looser in terms of the language versus you represent in our kind of hypothetical divorce clients, Eric and Melanie Wolf. If Melanie's living in the house and Eric's, I want this house to be sold, there's going to be a different kind of language. That's
Yep.
going to be pretty soon where we're going to figure out what's the best solution. And I don't think it's that far away where Eric and Melanie will be able to answer a few questions, or the AI program is going to know who Eric and Melanie are, and it's going to draft their optimal settlement agreement. I also, right now, you and I, we have paralegals that work with clients to gather up their financial information, put together financial disclosures. We're going to soon be able to plug in someone's
Yep.
username and password to their wellsfargo.com account and their Chase credit cards, and it's going to run a spending analysis and create all that for the client to begin with. And I think people, when they don't, either lawyers or Eric and Melanie, when they're going through a divorce and they don't realize that there's a lot more efficient ways of doing business. I think that is something that we really want to make sure and highlight for people to think about as they go through the process, because it's changing every day.
Yeah, and we've got other tools like family law software that already allow us to model finances in terms of showing a balance sheet and division of assets much more easily than the old days using just a bare spreadsheet, and also modeling support, child support, alimony. And but the point you're saying is well taken, and that is it's not going to be long when all you'll need to do is feed the data to something like family law software with an AI component, and it will just pop in all the relevant data where it needs to go. And also then, based on some inputs, give you maybe 3 settlement scenarios, whatever you want to look at, what 50-50, 45, 55-45, whatever it is, favoring one party or another. Give us the most tax advantaged thing for party A or party B. And it's going to eliminate a tremendous amount of grunt work agree with you in this process, both in the document analysis side and the document generation side, doc review, doc analysis, and then the document creation side, still leaving room for the lawyering, but a lot of raw processing and grunt work squeezed out of the process.
And I think that there is always going to be a role for you and me to talk with Eric and Melanie about their fears, about their goals, and really connect with them on a human experience to talk about their kids. I have a hard time really conceptualizing, as easy as it is to come up with an optimal settlement scenario where Eric gets the forks, Melanie gets the spoons, and Melanie gets the stock portfolio that is that is balanced in an optimal manner. You can run that scenario for sure in a computer system. It's not going to really tell them about the emotional connection that Melanie may have to the house, for example. And if we talk about potential dangers associated with using AI, if you don't know, you were talking about editing a blog post, there's certainly going to be a role for attorneys to edit and to customize and to really understand how the tools that they have at their disposal apply to Eric and Melanie's situation. So, what other potential dangers do you see that are associated with using AI in a divorce or in any sort of legal context right now?
So at present, there are substantial limitations with these models, and it's important to know what they are. So for example, ChatGPT is an iteration that they're calling, I think, 3.5, and they're saying 4.0 is coming out in the near future. The data set used for 3.5 goes somewhere through 2021. What's interesting is I've queried it to ask how Illinois child support is calculated, and this gives an example of what its limitations are. It will confidently tell you the correct answer, which is the income shares model. And then if you ask it again, it'll confidently tell you the old system that existed before 2017 and tell you that a straight percentage of the payor's net income is the model or is the system. And it'll tell you both things with equal confidence. That's just because this model hasn't been taught how to distinguish what is good law. And also current data aren't in there, like current cases, current legal information, like current statutes. But it's only a matter of time, like you point out, where somebody spends the time to train the model to approach it like an attorney and understand what controlling law is, what is good law, what is now outdated, what cases are overruled, and what is controlling. It's only a matter of time before the model understands that and can distinguish that. And it's been trained on the cases and the statutes and trained on how to understand all that. Once that happens, I think you'll see that error rate drop dramatically. I'm sure the legal research companies like Westlaw and Lexis are working on incorporating an AI model into their systems. They've got to be scrambling to do that at this point. So
for sure, I got a message. Casetext is our research software, and it already has a component of AI. If we upload, for example, a brief or a motion, it will then read it. It will tell us, hey, did you think about using this case or that case? It seems like you're filing this kind of motion, and it is absolutely on the radar for Lexis and Westlaw. I think Westlaw, or one of them, has some sort of AI program that they are already using. For me, I think there's some ethical issues that haven't really been ironed out. We hear about, just as an example, some of the autonomous driving. They haven't really figured out, for example, if a car is driving and a baby crosses the road and there's an elderly woman on the side of the road, is the car programmed to run over the old lady because society values a baby more? Those sorts of ethical conundrums I don't think have really been processed, but they've already come out with various programs that could listen to testimony and object or do those sorts of things. I think reading a jury or reading a judge, the facial expressions, it's not ready for prime time. But Rafe, you and I, when we schedule things, we use AI to schedule, to show our availability. And I think that the legal administration is going on. We're certainly seeing some efficiencies. If someone is paying for that, a client is paying for that, it's because it's baked into the lawyer's overhead. I think that's certainly something that needs to be considered. And then just some of the analysis and the visual you mentioned at the beginning, the Dolly, we use Custody Exchange for parenting schedules,
Yeah.
and really having that visual component to a calendar. I was talking to a friend of mine who's going through a divorce, and I'm too close to it, so I'm not involved, but he was like, my lawyer doesn't even know what that is. I listened to your podcast on that. And I think it's those tech tools, whether it be AI or in some other capacity, that I think is really the kind of main point of this episode.
Yeah, like, and one other word of caution about this, like recently, lawyers have recently been playing with ChatGPT and asking it to give them like 3 cases on a particular topic, and the app confidently gives them 3 cases that are completely fabricated. The names and the holdings and everything, but they look great. They look legit. And when you go look them up, you find out they don't exist. But again, that's just because ChatGPT hasn't been trained in looking at those cases. It hasn't digested that information and doesn't know how to think about that information, if you will. And that's only a matter of time. So you're right. It's going to impact the legal field in numerous ways. And the only thing we can do is inform the listeners about it so they understand and they're asking the right questions and understand the power and limitations of it. And hopefully we can stay ahead of this and understand how to best use it for the benefit of our clients and to run our businesses better.
There's certainly a risk in plagiarism because the way that the model, it basically scrapes other people's information and gathering up its intelligence. But the one analogy that I thought was very helpful for me, I saw it, I think, on LinkedIn, and it was a clip of Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs explained the use of the computer, and that if you looked at the efficiency of human versus a bird in terms of movement, the bird was far more efficient in terms of getting from point to A to point B because it could fly. But when you put a human being on a bicycle, then the bicycle enabled the human to be way more efficient than the bird. And it's human beings' capabilities of using other tools that really is what we do as a species incredibly well. People that just want to say, oh, AI, I'm not going to get into that. And the next thing I want to talk about is whether or not we're really talking about a bubble. And there's some financial issues involved with AI because a lot of money is going into this industry. But if people just reject it and just, I'm a Luddite and I don't really want to embrace it, those people are the same people that just said Zoom, I'm not going to enable Zoom during the pandemic. And right. They're either going to get pushed out, they're going to retire, or it's incumbent on people. It's arguably unethical not to familiarize yourself with these things. But the one thing before we started recording this, Rafe, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about whether or not this is a bubble. For me, there's going to be a lot of money going into these industries, and right. These people that are involved in AI are going to go through divorces, and we're going to have to know how are their businesses operating and just generally be aware of that industry and figuring out valuations and really what these people are doing at work. Any thoughts on that particular issue?
I certainly think it's good for us to understand these tools, both for our clients and understanding how these businesses operate, for the benefit of our law firms staying ahead of the technology curve and embracing them to solve problems for clients. Like you said, a famous memory of mine was as a law clerk a long time ago. I had a boss who said I could buy anything for the law firm as long as it didn't have a screen on it. He was not a fan of computers. That's how old I am. But computers were at the time, PCs were out there, and he just wanted the staff to have typewriters, believe it or not, electronic typewriters, but still typewriters. So lawyers are notorious for being slow to embrace change, period, and certainly technological change. And because of our regulatory moat that protects our industry, you have to be a licensed attorney to be in the business, at least in most states. That has insulated lawyers to some extent from needing to adopt tech tools. But so many lawyers have adopted the tools and have been successful that I think eventually it sweeps everyone along, or like you said, they retire or go out of business. So I think those who fail to recognize the power of these tools and fail to figure out how to utilize them will be at a dramatic competitive disadvantage eventually as clients see the tools used in their own business and understand the power of them and the economies, and will demand that their lawyers use the tools too. So of course you're going to use a large language model to help write the documents in my case. Why would you draft them the old-fashioned way? And we saw that a generation ago, 20 years ago, clients started saying to us, I know you're just pulling a form out of Word. You've got probably 50 marital settlement agreements there. I know it isn't taking you 8 hours to draft the settlement agreement. Maybe it's taking you 2. This is just that writ large, like another leap forward, where I know that settlement agreement doesn't take you 2 hours. It probably took you 10 minutes. And that's how it's going to be. Like you said, the AI model will be able to absorb the client data, the financial data, and all the information that we've put into the system and crank out a document better than a junior associate could.
I think one thing we've talked about in other capacities is what does that do to the industry? Competition is ultimately good for Eric and Melanie Wolf. If they're going through a divorce and there's competitive forces at play, then it's that ultimately is a benefit for them. Here in Colorado, we just had a program approved by the Colorado Supreme Court where there's licensed legal professionals, and they're essentially paralegals that can help with very simple, I shouldn't say very, but simple issues, and they'll be able to leverage some of this technology. And that is the reality that people are facing. And you can either embrace it or you can ignore it. And it's going to be coming up here, I think, a lot faster than people imagine. But Rafe, as always, really enjoy talking about these issues. It'll be interesting to see what happens when we come back in 5 years or 10 years to listen in, and we could be totally off base, or we could be ahead of the game and on point. So it'll be fascinating to see what happens as we go through this technological disrupting force that is AI.
Thanks a lot for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. I agree 100%.
Until next time, thanks for joining us on Divorce at Altitude. This is Ryan Kalamaya signing off.
Thanks. My wife started yelling down there. I don't know what was going on. I don't know. It was loud. What can I tell you? I don't know.